to the subcommittee to speak at it. In my opinion, in the opinion of the Socialist Party and the United Left Alliance, and in the opinion of the European United Left Group in the European Parliament, this is a treaty to impose synchronised, institutionalised austerity across Europe. It will mean billions more cuts and extra taxes on working class people in Ireland. It will mean tens of billions, or over 100 billion, in terms of cuts and extra taxes across Europe, again on ordinary people. And the result economically will be absolutely disastrous. If implemented to the letter, this would result in a much deepened economic crisis. We currently are where we are because of the austerity programmes that have been implemented. The Eurozone economy contracted at the end of 2011. We're back in recession as a result of this austerity, and this treaty does go further in terms of institutionalising those policies. In doing so, it also represents a very significant attack on the democratic right of people to elect a government to decide on economic policies. The media, or sections of the media, and those on the yes side have accused us on the no side of scaremongering in saying that this is an austerity treaty. I've produced a long submission that has been distributed, which goes in details in a textual analysis explaining how this treaty means austerity. To be honest, I've yet to come across an argument from the yes side that actually engages with the text of the treaty. I'll try and do in a short form here what I do in that submission and explain why that's the case. Article 3, in my opinion, is the most crucial provision. The structural deficit target is new. For Ireland, the target will be 0.5% for the vast majority. The deficit, a maximum of 0.5% for the vast majority of states signing up. It will be 0.5%. If you don't meet that, what is being imposed by the treaty is an automatic correction mechanism. A correction mechanism shall be triggered automatically. That has to be read as meaning that you have an automatic process in the budgetary mechanism whereby in the event that you go over the structural deficit, automatically a debt brake kicks in and cuts, austerity is automatically imposed, which means more misery for ordinary people, but also worsened economic circumstances. Marion spoke about the extreme difficulties in terms of measuring the structural deficit. The idea that we're going to put this into law and make this what is automatic in terms of triggering corrections is quite incredible. All the different institutions have different mechanisms, different methodologies in terms of assessing a country's structural deficit. Davy Stockbrokers produced a report, Ireland and the Fiscal Compact, where they pointed out the structural deficit is an abstract economic concept that cannot be observed with certainty, and they pointed out some of the vast discrepancies between the different organisations. The IMF in 2006 saying that Ireland had a structural deficit of 5.4%, while the Commission said we ran a surplus in the same year of 2.2%. In the EU, the Commission saying we ran a surplus of 1.2% in 2004, while the IMF said a structural deficit of 4.4% in the same year, and you go through all the years and it's like that. You have vast differences. And as I asked and got a positive response from the Danish ambassador in the first session of the meeting, is that the Commission's method of measurement discriminates against those countries that engage in higher amounts of social welfare spending, public spending. It discriminates against those sort of spending that the left would be in favour of. And it's an incredibly political mechanism. We don't know. We're signing up to something here that we still haven't seen the methodology that is going to be used. But in my opinion, we can presume that the Commission will continue to use the same methodology that they've used up until now. Unfortunately, we don't have an estimate for 2015 when this will become applicable for Ireland from the Commission. But we do have from the Department of Finance, which estimates we'll have a structural deficit of 3.7% in 2015. If the Commission was to demand, and they could, that you have to meet the structural deficit target in 1 year, 2015, that would mean we'd have to implement 3.2% of GDP worth of cuts. That would be an imposition of 5.7 billion euros worth of extra cuts, extra taxes on ordinary people. If they say, which is more likely in my opinion, that okay, you have till 2016 or 2017, but probably not beyond that, then you have an extension of austerity over a period of years. And that estimate of around €6 billion is a massive underestimate, because we've seen it here in this country, we've seen it in Greece, we've seen it across Europe. When you impose austerity, you savage your own economy. The IMF works off an estimate for every billion or so of austerity imposed, you lose about 500 million in GDP. And so you have a downward spiral, and actually you'd be talking about significantly more austerity like that. one important point, one very important point I think here, is let's not just look at it from the point of view of Ireland, but let's look at it from the point of view of the EU as a whole, or all those countries that are signing up to this. Because it's there that, like, the economic disaster that this represents become very clear. I've produced a spreadsheet which works off of the Commission estimates, the best Commission estimates we have, which go to 2013 of the structural deficit. In 2013, the Commission estimates that 18 out of the 25 countries that this will apply to will have a deficit greater than either 0.5% if that applies to them, or 1% if that applies to them. Ireland, Enda Kenny will be pleased to know, is top of the class. We have a structural deficit in 2015 of 8.1%, miles beyond anybody else, but you have others with 4%, 3%, etc. If the Commission was to impose, right, you all have to meet your target in 2013, and they probably won't. They'll probably say 2014, 2015, but it means the same thing over a longer period of time. What it means is 65 billion euros worth of cuts in France, 12.4 billion euros worth of cuts in Belgium, 6.7 billion euros worth of cuts in Austria. Totaled across Europe, if everyone was to meet this deficit all at once, 166 billion euros worth of cuts across the EU. That's absolutely devastating. And okay, you don't do 166 billion at once, you do 40, 40, 40, 40. Still absolutely devastating. The IMF's figure of 1 billion equaling 500 million, 1 billion of cuts equaling 500 million reduction in GDP. They say that where it happens that you have synchronized austerity across different countries that are trading partners at the same time, that ratio rises from 1 to 0.5 to 1 to 1. So if you cut 160 billion synchronized across the countries at the same time, you cut about 160 billion from the GDP. You can see it's absolutely devastating. And that's not just an opinion from the left, from socialists. Many respected economists, Rubini Global Economics last week produced a report whereby they said, in our view, the terms of the fiscal compact require a fiscal adjustment by most Eurozone countries that will significantly undermine their short-term growth prospects. If the treaty is not enforced, it will be positive for Eurozone growth prospects and therefore for fiscal sustainability. The same, the Lex column of the Financial Times, many other capitalist economists extremely critical. Just the next important point is the interaction between Article 3 of this treaty and Article 4 of the treaty, which is the debt reduction provision, right, which says if you go over 60% debt to GDP ratio, you have to reduce it at a rate of 1/20th of the excess per year, which Ireland will be around 120%, have an excess of 60%, a reduction therefore of about 3% of debt to GDP per year. There's two ways to do that. You can have economic growth, and then over time your debt is reduced as a percentage of your economy, of your GDP. But if you're savaging your economy because of the austerity already being imposed and now institutionalised by Article 3, well then that's ruled out. That's not going to happen. So then the only other way to reduce your debt is to pay the bondholders back, to pay their principal back on top of the interest payments. What it will mean for Ireland in 2015 is 4.5 billion euro back to the bondholders in principal repayments on top of the 9 billion in interest we'll be paying in that year. Is it any wonder that the Irish Times has a front page headline, or bankers are scared of the prospect of a no vote? This is a treaty made for the bondholders. On a European-wide basis, what it means is 115 billion euro worth of debt on a principal basis per year being paid back over a 20-year period. Without economic growth, absolutely devastating in terms of the deflationary impact across Europe. Just the last 2 points. Imposing the structural deficit target of 0.5% will mean in the long run of having debt significantly lower than 60% of GDP. A number of economists have expressed it will come down to something like 20%, 25%. And you see the vision that is being driven here. That is a neoliberal vision with a reduction in public spending, increase in privatisation. And for me, I mean, the most important thing that's being done here is that we have a crisis in Ireland. We have a crisis across Europe, and it's a crisis of unemployment. It's a crisis where we have 450,000 people on the live register. The only way to get out of this economic crisis is to get those people back to work. The reason, or an important reason, why you have such a crisis is a collapse in private sector investment. 70% since the beginning of the crisis in Ireland, over 30 billion euros. You have an increase in profits over the last couple of years, but you still have a continuing decline until actually the last quarter of 2011. For the first time, you saw an uptick in terms of private sector investment. But the private sector isn't going to get us out of this crisis. They're not going to invest to the extent necessary. But this treaty effectively rules out the public investment necessary to get people back to work and therefore redevelop the economy. Last point, democracy. This It restricts the ability of people to elect a government with a policy other than neoliberalism. It rules the policies I stand for, socialist economic policies. It rules them illegal. It rules out even moderate Keynesian economic policies. It rules them illegal. It's completely undemocratic, in my opinion. Article 5 is also important, should be looked at in terms of the transfer of powers. Just that the ESM treaty is not a reason to vote for this treaty, or the access to ESM funding. It's incredible. This is a blackmail clause that has been inserted with the complicity of the government. The government has to answer the question, how did the blackmail clause get added? They agreed to it. It was agreed unanimously. But also, the vote is not taking place now on the ESM treaty and the amendment to the TFEU to allow the ESM to come into being until after we vote. So if we vote no, the pressure is back on the government, and it's up to the government at that stage, in my opinion, to give us a referendum on the ESM, which we should have had from the start, but at the very least to veto the treaty, which it has the power to do, until the blackmail clause is removed.
Thank you very much, MEP Murphy.